She wasn't the Duchess he dreamed of, but she became the wife the Duke required. Snow had begun to fall lightly, coating the ancient castle walls in white silence. The streets below the palace were empty, save for the occasional torchbearer hurrying through the cold. In the heart of this kingdom stood the grand castle, its towers piercing the clouds, where secrets and shadows moved as freely as the wind. Lady Seraphine had never imagined arriving in a place like this. She had grown up in a quiet, noble estate, where life was predictable and safe. Yet here she was, stepping into a world of golden chandeliers, whispering courtiers, and a man she did not know but was expected to marry. The Duke of Valethorn, a figure of mystery, power, and fear. Seraphine wrapped her cloak tightly around her as she stepped into the castle hall. The air was cold, carrying the faint scent of wax and smoke from the torches. Her heart raced. Every step echoed on the marble floors, a sound that seemed to announce her presence to the walls themselves. Courtiers turned to look, their expressions polite but scrutinizing, measuring the young woman who had come to be their Duchess. The Duke did not wait to greet her. He was already there, standing in the shadows of the hall as if the darkness itself had taken form. He was tall, his frame commanding, with eyes that seemed to look not just at her but through her, reading the thoughts she did not speak. His expression was unreadable, a mask that showed neither warmth nor malice, only control. "Lady Seraphine," he said finally, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Welcome to Valethorn." "Thank you, your grace," she replied, bowing her head. Her voice sounded small to her own ears, swallowed by the vastness of the hall. He studied her for a long moment. "You must understand," he said slowly, "that life here is not gentle. You will find that loyalty is rare and ambition is everywhere. Do not let appearances fool you." Seraphine nodded, though a tremor of fear ran through her. She had read about the Duke, his reputation for cunning, his unyielding demeanor, the rumors of a past filled with tragedy. Yet despite the tales, she had hoped for a man capable of kindness. But even now, she wondered if she had been naive. Her rooms were at the highest tower of the castle, overlooking the frozen gardens below. From the window, she could see the snow drifting silently over statues that had stood for centuries, their faces frozen in expressions of solemn grace. It was beautiful, yes, but there was a chill in the air that made her shiver, not just from the cold but from the weight of the unknown. The first night in the castle was quiet, almost too quiet. Seraphine could hear her own heartbeat, loud in her ears, and the distant creak of the castle settling in its foundations. Yet beneath the normal sounds of the old building, there was another sound, a faint whisper, like wind moving through hidden corridors, calling her name. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was only her imagination. But as she lay in bed, she could not sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to the Duke, to the cold way he had looked at her, and to the stories of ghosts that haunted the castle's corridors. She wondered if some of them were true. The next morning, she attended the first of many court gatherings. Nobles in glittering robes and elaborate masks moved through the great hall, exchanging greetings that were more like challenges. Seraphine felt out of place, her modest attire contrasting with the grandeur around her. She noticed the Duke again, watching from a balcony above, his gaze like ice upon her skin. During the ceremony, a servant whispered to her about the curse that was said to haunt the Duke. "They say his heart has never known love," the servant said in hushed tones, "and that misfortune follows him like a shadow. Be careful, my lady." Seraphine felt a chill run down her spine. Was it possible that a curse could shape a man's life so completely? She thought of the Duke's eyes, the way he seemed both distant and present, as if part of him were always elsewhere. There was sadness there, too, she realized. A deep, old sadness hidden behind the mask of authority. Days passed, and Seraphine began to learn the rhythms of the castle. She walked the halls, observed the courtiers, and tried to understand the man she was to marry. Each encounter with the Duke was carefully measured. He would speak to her sometimes, offering words that were polite but distant. Other times, he would appear suddenly in the halls, his presence commanding attention, and then vanish again before she could find the courage to speak. One evening, as twilight fell and the sky was painted in shades of purple and gray, Seraphine ventured into the western wing, a part of the castle she had been warned to avoid. The hallways there were narrow, lined with portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow her. Her steps echoed softly as she moved forward, drawn by a sense she could not explain. She came upon a door, slightly ajar, and a strange feeling overcame her. A faint light flickered from within. Curiosity pushed her forward. She opened the door fully and stepped inside. The room was unlike any other in the castle. The walls were lined with books and scrolls, and in the center stood a large mirror framed in black and silver. But what caught her attention was not the furniture or the decor. It was the visions in the mirror. They were not her own reflections, but scenes from another life, images of the Duke as a younger man, moments of sorrow and loss, battles fought and hearts broken. She saw him weep, rage, and struggle, all hidden from the world. Seraphine gasped softly, stepping back. A presence stirred behind her, and she turned to find the Duke standing there, his expression unreadable. "I see you found my history," he said quietly. "Few ever dare to enter this room." I didn't mean to," she began, but he held up a hand. "Curiosity is not a crime," he said, stepping closer. "But knowledge comes with a price. You must decide if you are willing to bear it." Her heart pounded. I want to understand," she admitted. He studied her for a long moment, and then, almost imperceptibly, his eyes softened. "Then you must know this," he said. "The world you see here is only part of me. The rest is a shadow, one that I have carried for years. You must choose if you are brave enough to stay by my side, knowing that shadows can bite." Seraphine felt a strange thrill, a mix of fear and fascination. She had expected a cold, distant man, but here was someone wounded, complex, and very human. For the first time, she realized that marriage would not be about comfort or ease. It would be a journey through darkness and light, a test of courage and heart. Over the following days, Seraphine's presence in the castle became more than formal duty. She began to notice the small cracks in the Duke's armor, the way he lingered near the gardens at night, staring at the frozen statues, or the rare moments when he allowed a flicker of emotion to escape. And slowly she began to feel her own walls crumble, replaced by empathy, curiosity, and a quiet longing she had never known. Yet the castle was not silent. Whispers circulated, warnings and rumors alike. Some spoke of the Duke's temper, others of the curse that plagued him. And always there were shadows. Shadows that seemed to move with intent, watching, waiting, and reminding Seraphine that the world of Veilthorn was not gentle. One night, as snow fell heavier than before, Seraphine could not sleep. She walked the halls once more, drawn to the room of mirrors. The door was closed this time, but she felt the pull of the past, the sorrow, and the secrets it held. And then she heard it, a whisper, faint but clear, calling her name. Her heart raced. She followed the sound, down narrow staircases and twisting corridors, until she came upon a small, hidden chamber she had never seen before. Inside, the air was thick with a strange warmth, and shadows danced along the walls. In the center, a single candle burned, though no one was visible. "Seraphine," the voice whispered again, soft and urgent, "do you understand what you have entered?" She swallowed hard, fear and determination mingling within her. "I want to understand," she said aloud, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. The candle flickered, and in its glow a vision appeared, brief flashes of the Duke's life, of battles fought, losses endured, and a heart weighed by sorrow. She saw his loneliness, his struggle against the darkness within, and the heavy burden of duty that had shaped him. Seraphine realized then that her journey in Veilthorn was only beginning. She had entered a world of shadows and secrets, of power and pain. And in that world, she would have to find not only the courage to survive, but the strength to reach the heart of a man who had long been lost to his own darkness. As she left the hidden chamber, the snow outside whispered against the castle walls. The first chapter of her life at Valethorn had begun, and she knew it would change her forever. Somewhere in the castle, the Duke watched, aware of her discovery, and for the first time in years, a flicker of something unspoken passed through his eyes, a hint of curiosity, perhaps even hope. And so, under the heavy sky and falling snow, the shadows of the court waited, patient and watchful, for the story that was only just beginning. The winter in Valethorn deepened, painting the castle and its surroundings in shades of white and gray. Snow fell in endless waves, muffling sound and hiding the sharp edges of the world. Within the walls of the ancient castle, the firelight burned brightly, yet shadows still clung to the corners, moving in shapes only imagination could recognize. Lady Seraphine walked carefully through the halls, her footsteps echoing softly. She had learned to navigate the palace quietly, observing the courtiers' eyes and noting their whispers. Many looked upon her with suspicion. Some envied her, others pitied her. Yet the Duke's gaze remained constant, distant, and unreadable. The Duke, for his part, remained a man of silence. His presence filled every room he entered, yet he spoke little to her directly. He observed her in quiet moments, the way one might watch a fire, studying its light, aware of its power, cautious not to get burned. And in those moments, Seraphine saw glimpses of the man beneath the mask. She saw the flicker of sadness in his eyes, the weight that seemed to rest upon his shoulders like an unseen chain. One evening, as the wind howled outside and snow drifted against the tall windows, the Duke summoned Seraphine to the library. It was a vast room filled with shelves of old books and the smell of aged parchment. Candles burned in the sconces along the walls, casting shadows that danced like living creatures. "Sit," the Duke commanded softly, indicating a chair near the fireplace. Seraphine obeyed, her heart beating fast. She had no idea what he intended. He remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the flames. "You have seen some of my history," he said after a long silence. "You have glimpsed the parts of me that others never are allowed to see." Seraphine nodded, her curiosity warring with her fear. "Yes, Your Grace. I want to understand you, not to judge, but to know." The Duke's expression shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. He looked at her, really looked, as if measuring her courage. "Understanding is dangerous," he said quietly. "It opens doors that cannot be closed, but perhaps you are not afraid of danger." Her heart warmed at his words, though she could not ignore the caution beneath them. "I am not afraid of you," she said softly, choosing her words with care. I want to learn, I want to help if I can." He considered her, and for a moment the cold mask slipped, revealing a hint of something long buried. "Very well," he said, "then you shall see more. But remember, everything here has a price." In the following days, Seraphine began to witness the world of Valethorn in its true form. She saw the delicate balance of power in the court, the alliances, the betrayals, the hidden rivalries. Every gesture, every glance carried meaning. The nobles whispered behind closed doors, plotting for advantage, yet all feared the Duke's judgment. He was a man who demanded respect, not through cruelty alone, but through the weight of his presence and the knowledge that he saw everything. But it was not the court that consumed Seraphine's thoughts, it was the Duke himself. She noticed small habits, the way he would pause before speaking, the way he would sometimes touch a locket around his neck absent-mindedly, the faint scars on his hands from battles both known and unseen. Each detail drew her closer, weaving a quiet thread of empathy between them. One afternoon, she found herself wandering the frozen gardens. The statues, covered in snow, looked almost alive in the pale light, their faces frozen in expressions of solemn grace. She felt a presence behind her and turned to find the Duke standing at the edge of the path, watching her. "You enjoy the gardens," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "They are peaceful," she replied. Even with the cold, there is a sense of quiet. I feel free here." The Duke stepped closer, the snow crunching under his boots. "Freedom is a dangerous feeling," he said. "It can tempt you to forget caution, yet I understand it is tempting even to me." Seraphine looked at him, noticing for the first time the vulnerability in his posture. He was always so composed, so guarded, yet here in the gardens he seemed human. And for the first time she felt that perhaps the distance between them could be bridged. Days turned into nights, and Seraphine's understanding of the Duke grew. She learned of the curse that haunted him, not a magical spell, but a legacy of sorrow and betrayal. His family had suffered betrayals that left wounds on generations, and the Duke carried them like a burden no one else could see. He had closed himself off to love, believing it could only bring ruin. And yet, despite this, she sensed that a part of him longed for connection, for someone brave enough to reach through the shadows. One night, a storm raged outside, shaking the castle and rattling the windows. Seraphine sat by the fire, reading a book the Duke had allowed her to borrow. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the courtyard. She leapt to her feet, heart pounding, and ran toward the noise. In the courtyard, a masked figure struggled against the guards. Seraphine gasped. The Duke was already there, moving with calm precision, disarming the intruder and commanding the guards with authority that brooked no argument. Without thinking, Seraphine ran forward, pulling a fallen torch to scare the intruder. The figure stumbled, and for a moment Seraphine feared for her life. But the Duke's hand caught hers, steadying her, and together they subdued the intruder. When the danger passed, he looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You should not have come here," he said quietly. "It is not safe for you." I couldn't stay inside while someone was in danger," she said, her voice trembling. "I had to help." He studied her, the faintest shadow of a smile crossing his face. "You are brave," he said, "perhaps too brave. But there is value in courage." After that night, something between them shifted. The Duke allowed Seraphine more freedom, yet he also watched her closely, teaching her to navigate the dangers of court life and the subtleties of power. He began to share more of his past, though always carefully, revealing only what he believed she could bear. And in return, Seraphine shared herself, her thoughts, her fears, her dreams, slowly breaking down the walls that had protected him for so long. One evening, as winter's chill reached its peak, Seraphine was drawn once more to the hidden chamber she had discovered. In part, the door was slightly ajar, as if inviting her in. Inside, the candle burned faintly, and the shadows on the walls seemed to lean closer. A voice whispered her name again, faint but clear. She followed the sound to the mirror where visions danced, scenes of battles fought, promises broken, and the loneliness that had defined the Duke's life. This time he was there with her, silent, watching as she absorbed the images. "You see what I have endured," he said softly, "and yet you still remain." I cannot leave," she admitted. "I want to understand. I want to be here with you." He looked at her, a mixture of surprise and something else flickering in his gaze. "Few have the strength to say that," he said, "and fewer still to mean it." The candle flickered, and the shadows twisted, forming shapes almost human. "There are forces in this castle, in this kingdom, that are not kind," the Duke warned. "Even those who wish you no harm may cause it by accident. You must be prepared." "I am," Seraphine said, her voice steady. "I am prepared to face them with you." For the first time in years, the Duke allowed a faint smile to touch his lips. It was not warmth, not yet, but a crack in the armor, a promise that perhaps, in time, trust and connection could grow. And so, in the heart of winter, with snow piling against the windows and firelight dancing across the walls, Seraphine and the Duke stood together in silence, bound by circumstance, curiosity, and the first fragile threads of understanding. Outside, the world remained cold and dangerous, but within the castle walls, a quiet fire had begun to burn, one that neither shadows nor curses could easily extinguish. Yet even as they stood there, a whisper drifted through the halls, unnoticed by all but Seraphine. A warning, soft and sinister, that not all shadows were yet revealed, and that the greatest trials for her heart and his were still to come. Winter had begun to retreat from Valethorn, leaving a gray and quiet landscape in its wake. The snow melted slowly, revealing frostbitten gardens and frozen streams. Within the castle walls, life went on with measured routines, but beneath the polished surfaces, tension simmered. Lady Seraphine had grown more confident in her role at court. She moved among the nobles with a quiet grace, learning their customs and reading their intentions. Yet her attention remained on the Duke, whose presence continued to fascinate and unsettle her. Every gesture he made carried weight, every glance held unspoken meaning. And still, he remained distant, a fortress she could only slowly approach. The Duke's hidden struggles had begun to surface in small ways. He confided in her at times, speaking quietly of the pressures of leadership, of battles he had fought, and of decisions that weighed heavily on his conscience. Seraphine listened carefully, offering empathy and understanding, never pity. "You bear too much alone," she said one evening as they walked the balcony, the cold wind swirling around them. "You do not have to carry it all by yourself." The Duke looked at her, his eyes reflecting the fading light of the sunset. "And yet some burdens cannot be shared," he said softly. "They are mine alone." "But perhaps they do not have to be," Seraphine replied. "Perhaps a shared burden is lighter." For a moment he said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. It was a gesture that carried more meaning than words ever could, a sign that he was beginning to trust her with the shadow of his heart. Meanwhile, whispers in the court grew louder. Rumors of rebellion and betrayal stirred among the nobles. Some feared the Duke's power, others envied it, and some plotted quietly in the dark corners of the palace. Seraphine became aware that her presence, though intended to be a support, had made her a target. She realized that the path she had chosen, standing by the Duke, would not be safe. One evening, as twilight fell, Seraphine wandered into the palace gardens. The frost had left patterns on the trees and statues, intricate as lace. She felt a presence before she saw it, the Duke approaching from the shadows, silent as a ghost. "You should not wander alone," he said, his voice low yet carrying concern. "I could say the same to you," she replied. "But the gardens call to me. They feel alive." He studied her for a moment, the wind tugging at his dark cloak. "You have courage," he said quietly, "and perhaps something else, compassion. That is dangerous here." "Perhaps," she said softly, "but I will not turn away." A sudden rustle in the trees drew their attention. Shadows moved unnaturally, twisting and forming shapes that were almost human. Seraphine's heart raced. The Duke's hand brushed hers, steadying her, and together they watched as the shadows seemed to dance in the dim light. "They are here," the Duke whispered. "The remnants of what haunts this place. They sense weakness." Seraphine swallowed hard. "And do they harm people?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "Sometimes they merely watch, but their presence is a warning." The shadows receded and the gardens fell silent once more. Seraphine realized that Valethorn was alive in ways she had not imagined. Its history, its grief, its curses were as much a part of it as the stone walls and frozen statues. And the Duke, carrying the weight of all this, was a man shaped not only by power but by the shadows themselves. In the weeks that followed, Seraphine's connection with the Duke deepened. He began to allow her into his private world, a study filled with maps and letters, a chamber where he practiced swordsmanship in silence, and rooms where he confided thoughts he had long held back. She learned of the people he had lost, the battles that had scarred him, and the choices that had forced him into isolation. Yet, she also began to see his moments of kindness, small gestures that revealed the man beneath the cold exterior. He noticed when she shivered and offered his cloak, when her hair caught the wind and needed adjusting, when her hands trembled while reading ancient texts. These gestures were quiet, but they spoke volumes. One night, as the moon rose high above the castle, Seraphine was drawn once more to the hidden chamber, the room of mirrors and shadows. The door opened easily, as if it had been waiting for her. Inside, the candle burned, flickering and casting shapes on the walls. The mirrors showed visions again, scenes of battles fought long ago, promises broken, and the loneliness that had defined the Duke's life. But this time, there was something different. A vision of Seraphine appeared as well, standing beside him, her presence a calm force amidst the turmoil. The Duke stepped into the room quietly. "You see yourself," he said softly, "and yet you do not understand fully." "I think I understand more than before," Seraphine replied. "I see your burdens, your pain, and I want to help carry them." He looked at her, his eyes dark with emotion. "Few have ever offered that," he said, "and fewer still have proven their courage to follow through." "I am not afraid," she said. "I want to stand with you through all the shadows, all the dangers." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then a faint flicker of warmth appeared in the Duke's expression, a vulnerability he had never shown openly. "Very well," he said. "Then you shall see the truth, the part of my life I have hidden even from myself." Over the next days, he guided her through the deeper parts of the castle, areas even the courtiers avoided. Hidden chambers, ancient armories, and halls that smelled of forgotten centuries became the backdrop of their growing bond. Seraphine listened and learned, but more importantly, she understood that the Duke's past was not merely his own. It was tied to the history of the kingdom, to curses and legacies that could not be ignored. One afternoon, while exploring a forgotten library, Seraphine discovered a journal belonging to the Duke. The pages were filled with sorrow and regret, chronicling losses that weighed heavily on him, friends betrayed, battles lost, and choices made in the name of duty. She read carefully, her heart aching for the man she was beginning to know. The Duke appeared silently, watching her read. "It is difficult, is it not?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly, "but it shows me who you truly are and why you are so guarded." He stepped closer. "Most see only the power, the coldness. Few see the man who is left behind, the one who wonders if he is worthy of love or trust." Seraphine looked at him, feeling the truth in his words. "I see you," she said. "Not just the Duke, but the man beneath. And I care for him." The Duke's expression softened slightly, the first real sign of warmth. "Care is dangerous," he said quietly. "It can bring joy or it can destroy." "I am willing to risk it," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I am willing to stand by you no matter the shadows." That night a storm rolled in from the north, shaking the castle walls and rattling the windows. Lightning illuminated the sky, and thunder rolled like the roar of ancient giants. Seraphine could not sleep, her thoughts full of the Duke, the court, and the shadows that lingered everywhere. She decided to walk the halls once more, seeking solace in movement. As she passed the eastern corridor, she heard whispers again, faint voices carried on the wind. Her heart pounded. The Duke had warned her, yet she felt drawn toward the sound, compelled to discover its source. The corridor led her to a hidden chamber she had never seen before. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with magic, or perhaps the remnants of old grief. Shadows twisted along the walls, forming shapes that seemed alive. In the center, a faint light glowed, and a voice whispered her name. Seraphine's courage did not fail her. She stepped forward, her hand reaching toward the light. And in that moment she felt the presence of the Duke behind her, steadying her, protecting her. Together they faced the unknown, their hearts beating in unison, bound by trust, courage, and a connection that had grown beyond duty or curiosity. The shadows stirred, but neither moved back. Seraphine understood that she had crossed a threshold, not just into the mysteries of the castle, but into the heart of the Duke himself. And the Duke, for his part, realized that this woman, unlike anyone else he had known, might be the one capable of helping him face the shadows that had haunted him for so long. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, a quiet understanding had formed. The Duke and Seraphine were no longer two strangers bound by obligation. They were companions, allies, and perhaps, in time, something more. Yet, even as they stood together, they knew the greatest challenge had not yet come. The curse, the shadows, and the hidden enemies of Valethorn still lingered, waiting for the moment to test the strength of their bond. And so, with hearts linked and courage renewed, they faced the night, aware that their journey had only just begun, and that the echoes of the heart would demand more than either had ever imagined. Spring was slowly returning to Valethorn, though the land bore the scars of winter's cold. Streams gurgled under melting ice, and frost still lingered in the shadowed corners of the castle. Yet within those ancient walls, a heavier tension simmered. The shadows Seraphine and the Duke had felt were no longer whispers. They were growing stronger, gathering in the corners of hallways, twisting through hidden chambers, and murmuring threats that carried both sorrow and danger. Lady Seraphine had grown stronger too. No longer the timid girl who had arrived at the castle, she now moved with quiet confidence, reading the intentions of the courtiers and understanding the Duke in ways few could. She had seen the weight of his burdens and had begun to shoulder them alongside him, her courage becoming a flame that both warmed and steadied him. The Duke, for his part, had begun to change in ways subtle but profound. He still carried the scars of loss, the memory of betrayal, and the caution that had protected him for so long. But Seraphine's presence had softened him, not in weakness, but in a quiet strength that came from trust. His icy demeanor began to melt in her company, revealing glimpses of the man he had once been, before life and duty had hardened him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, Seraphine walked the eastern corridor, drawn by an urge she could not name. The castle was unusually quiet, the usual creaks and whispers muted by anticipation. She felt the presence of someone watching, waiting. "The shadows grow restless," a voice said behind her. The Duke stepped from the darkness, his cloak brushing the stone floor. His eyes, usually guarded, were wide with concern. "They are more than restless," Seraphine said. "I can feel them as if they are gathering strength." He nodded, his jaw tight. "It is time to face what has haunted this castle and my heart for too long." Together, they moved to the hidden chamber where Seraphine had first glimpsed the Duke's past. The room was filled with mirrors and shadows, the candle flickering as if aware of the approaching danger. The Duke placed a hand on the wall, tracing the blackened silver frame of the central mirror. "Everything I have hidden, everything I have feared will come to life tonight. You must be ready." Seraphine stepped closer, placing her hand over his. "I am ready. For you, for us." The air grew heavy, and the shadows in the corners of the room began to twist and rise. Shapes formed, fleeting faces of the Duke's past, friends lost, promises broken, and battles that had left scars deeper than any sword could inflict. They moved with intention, circling, whispering, and testing the courage of anyone who dared to stand against them. "You must not falter," the Duke said, his voice low but firm. "The shadows are drawn to fear. Stand with me and we will face them together." Seraphine nodded, gripping his hand. The warmth of her touch seemed to anchor him, and he drew strength from her courage. Together, they stepped into the center of the chamber. The shadows surged, swirling around them like a storm of darkness. Faces emerged from the black, voices murmuring regrets, anger, and sorrow. The Duke raised his hand, and for a moment the room stilled, as if acknowledging his command. Yet the shadows would not yield entirely. "You are stronger together than you realize," a whisper echoed, seeming to come from the walls themselves. "But the price of redemption is not small. You must give what has been withheld." "What must we do?" Seraphine asked, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "Face the truth," the Duke said, turning to her. "I must face my past fully. You must face the choice to stay, knowing the danger and the pain that comes with it. Seraphine looked at him, feeling the weight of the moment. She had chosen this path willingly, but now the shadows demanded proof, not just of courage, but of commitment, trust, and love. "I will not leave you," she said quietly. "I will face whatever comes as long as we face it together." The Duke's eyes glimmered with emotion, something raw and unshielded. "Then we begin," he said. He stepped forward, and the shadows surged violently, forming the most vivid of his memories. The betrayal of a trusted ally, the death of a friend, and the moment he had closed his heart to love, believing it would only bring pain. Pain twisted into fury, fury into grief, and grief into the very essence of the shadows themselves. Seraphine felt the force of it, as if the air itself sought to push her back. She clung to the Duke, drawing on his presence, his steadiness, and the bond they had built. "We are stronger than fear," she said aloud. "Stronger than the shadows." The Duke nodded, his hand brushing her cheek, grounding himself in her courage. Together they stepped forward, facing each vision, naming the fear and acknowledging the sorrow. Slowly the shadows began to waver, their shapes less distinct, their whispers less sharp. The Duke faced the moment of greatest pain, the night he had lost the only person he had ever truly loved. "Enough," he said firmly, his voice echoing in the chamber. "You do not own me any longer. I am not your prisoner." The shadows recoiled, twisting and shrinking, until they dissolved into faint motes of light that drifted to the ceiling. The chamber grew still, the mirrors reflecting only Seraphine and the Duke, standing together, alive and breathing, victorious in their courage. Seraphine sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the intensity of what they had faced. The Duke knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You have helped me face what I could not alone," he said softly. "You have brought light to the shadows of my heart." She looked up at him, tears in her eyes, yet a smile touching her lips. "And you have shown me what true courage is," she said. "Not the absence of fear, but the strength to face it together." The storm outside had passed, leaving the world quiet and still. Through the windows, dawn began to light the frozen landscape, soft rays of gold filtering into the chamber. It felt as though the castle itself had exhaled, releasing the weight of years of sorrow. The Duke rose, offering his hand to Seraphine. She took it, and together they stepped from the chamber, walking through halls that now felt less oppressive, less haunted. The castle, though ancient and full of history, seemed lighter somehow, its shadows less threatening, its walls more welcoming. In the weeks that followed, life in the castle began to change. The Duke's presence remained commanding, but he was no longer the distant, icy figure he had been. Seraphine saw him smile more freely, speak with warmth, and even allow small moments of humor to slip through. Their bond had deepened, not merely as allies, but as companions, partners, and perhaps, in time, as something more profound. The court, too, began to recognize the change. Nobles who had plotted in whispers now approached with cautious respect, sensing the strength of unity between the Duke and his Duchess. And while threats still existed, political and supernatural alike, they were no longer insurmountable, for the Duke and Seraphine had proven that together they could face whatever came. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber, the Duke led Seraphine to the highest tower. From there, they could see the entire kingdom, the forests, rivers, and distant mountains. "You have changed everything," the Duke said quietly, his arm around her waist. "Not by force, not by duty, but by courage and heart. You have redeemed more than just me. You have redeemed this place, this life, and perhaps even yourself." Seraphine rested her head against his shoulder. "We have done this together," she said. "You showed me the shadows, and I chose to stay. You showed me your heart, and I chose to trust." The Duke's hand brushed a strand of hair from her face, his eyes reflecting the golden light. "Then let us step forward," he said softly, "not as a duke and his duchess bound by duty, but as two hearts bound by choice, trust, and the strength we have found together." The first light of dawn broke over Valethorn, illuminating the castle towers, the gardens, and the land beyond. Snow still lingered in patches, but life was returning to the kingdom. And in that moment, Seraphine and the Duke stood together, no longer prisoners of fear or shadows, but partners in a world they had reclaimed with courage, love, and trust. The shadows of the past remained as memories, but they were no longer threats. They were reminders of the strength they had discovered in each other. And as they held hands and looked out over the awakening kingdom, both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, their hearts and souls forever entwined. The curse that had haunted the Duke for years was lifted, not by magic alone, but by the courage of one who dared to enter his shadows and the choice to remain through the darkness. Love, trust, and redemption had transformed the cold halls of Valethorn into a place of warmth and hope. And so, in the heart of a kingdom reborn, their story, born of darkness, forged in courage and sealed by trust, found its beginning anew. Together they stepped into the future, no longer defined by shadows, but by the light they had created together.